All right. Welcome back to the Contrarians. We have another panel discussion for you tonight. We are going to be doing something a little bit different. It's not a dark horse album. We're going to be doing sort of a versus comparison discussion tonight. We're going to be talking about Accident of Birth by Bruce Dickinson versus Brave New World by Iron Maiden. So this is kind of a cool discussion. Two albums released, within I think 3 years of each other, and sort of an interesting sound. And there's the Bruce Dickinson, Adrian Smith of it all as well. So some cool things we'll go over tonight, I'm sure. If you like the Contrarians, if you like discussion of heavy metal and rock nature, please give the video a like and share it with friends. If you like it, you can consider a subscribe. There's other ways to support the channel as well. Links to those in the description if you care to do that. So I'm going to give just a very brief summary information about these two albums, so we have a little bit of context, and then we're just going to dive right into it. We have a great panel here today of Reed and Peter, and if someone else joins in while we're going, we're going to give them a shout too. But for now, it is these two. Accident of Birth is the fourth studio album released by Bruce Dickinson. It's released in 1997 on June 3rd. Features Adrian Smith on guitars. Martin Popov actually described Accident of Birth as a unabashed metal record produced smoothly and firmly, and added that it would have made an intelligent and ironically daring Maiden reunion record. So that's sort of maybe the crux of this discussion tonight. Brave New World is the 12th studio album released by Iron Maiden. It was released in 2000 on May 29th. This marked the return of Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith, so we can see why this comparison needs to be made. It's pretty on the nose. So without any more delay, I'm going to throw it over to our panel here. They're going to each give their thoughts on both the albums, then they're going to talk about that comparison, and they're going to let you know what they pick. And since it's two people right now, it's all or nothing. We're either going to be unanimous or we won't, which I guess is actually always the situation, but it feels like the stakes are higher. All right, I'm going to throw it to Reed first. So Reed, take it away, and your thoughts on Accident of Birth versus Brave New World.
Okay, so it's interesting. There are a lot of these panels that we have that the very first thing that happens is the guest talks about how hard it was for them to come to any decisions. And that is almost never my experience. But this time it is, because both of these albums mean so much to me outside of purely the sonics of the album. I am an unabashed Bruce Dickinson maniac. I love his solo albums generally more than I love Iron Maiden, certainly more than 21st century Iron Maiden. But I have a bit of a contentious relationship with him. His first solo album, Tattooed Millionaire, as he put it, was a weekend drunken lark. Somebody just threw some money at him to put together a solo album, and he grabbed some buddies and recorded an album without any idea that it would have any sort of commercial impact. And then later he left Iron Maiden. You've really got two situations that happen most frequently, I think, when people go solo from bands. They either do the exact same music as if to prove that they were the reason that the music worked in the first place, or they do something vastly different. Bruce Dickinson seems to have a restless intellect. If you've never read his autobiography, What Does This Button Do? It's really entertaining. And he decided he was going to do something as different from Iron Maiden as he could. And he set out to record, as they put it, a Peter Gabriel album that never saw the light of day. It's eventually come out as bonus tracks and pieces of other albums. And then he hooked up with a band called Tribe of Gypsies that he saw performing in Los Angeles. And they released an album called Balls to Picasso, which was a very strange album. I don't know exactly how to describe it. But certainly there was no Iron Maiden left in it. And I liked Balls to Picasso, but I didn't love it. And then he went full on grunge with the Jack Endino produced Skunkworks. Interspace is one of the songs on Skunkworks. And at the time, I was not ready for Bruce Dickinson to go grunge, and I just hated that album. Now I love it, but at the time I wasn't ready. So I missed Accident of Birth when it came out. And in fact, it was one day I walked into the office, and the only other guy in the office that listened to hard rock said, "Hey, Bruce Dickinson has rejoined Iron Maiden, and they're playing a concert in Dallas. Tickets go on sale tomorrow." And I went, "Oh, well, I've got to get on that." So I was living in Oklahoma City. That's a 2.5 hour, I think 3 hours to the venue drive to go see this concert. But so I bought tickets, and then I thought, well, I wonder what he did after Skunk Works, and found Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding. So I think I heard Brave New World first, and then Accident of Birth. Not 100% certain on that at this point. Regardless, the two albums do get compared a lot, and for the obvious reasons that, you know, both Bruce and Adrian, I'm familiar with Adrian's solo career. I have both of his albums with Psycho Motel. I think they're great. They sound very much like Stone Temple Pilots with more outside guitar playing. So he was very much, again, trying to be contemporary and get away from the Iron Maiden sound, and was not commercially successful. But he hooked up with Bruce. At this point, Bruce had put out several albums which had done literally nothing, and he didn't know if he had a career anymore. He self-financed at least 2 of his albums, so he had spent a lot of money for basically no return. And he said Roy Z played him the lick. I don't remember exactly which one of the songs it was, but played him the lick over the phone and said, maybe you just need to go metal again. And he decided that that was, in fact, what he was going to do. So he talks Adrian Smith into joining the project, although Adrian only has writing credits on 2 songs on Accident of Birth. Right. So in interviews, Roy Z is an interesting figure because he became better known as a producer than as a guitar player. Also associated with Halford and Wasp, and he produced The Dark Ride, which is my favorite Halloween album, and he did a whole lot of other things. But he's kind of circumspect about his role, and the way he describes it is Adrian was the phrasing guy and I was the chops guy, which I think is an interesting way to put it. So the album Accident of Birth, there's the collector's edition that came with the second CD. Yes, it had multiple images. The one that you could see him bursting out of the guy's head, I think the one that, yeah, this image that Peter's holding up now was the European release. It was considered too graphic for American markets, so they came up with this image. And then in the for the collector's edition, they have this one of him being actually crucified, which is I don't know, more offensive in some circles probably. In any case, because it's Bruce and Adrian returning to heavy metal, this album gets compared to Brave New World a lot. And I'm dying to hear what Peter has to say about this. But to me, these albums are actually very different albums. Regardless of the fact that Bruce and Adrian are involved, we're talking about some very, very different material here. And the common narrative with Accident of Birth that you hear people, you heard it in magazines, you just heard it from, you know, the quote from Martin Popoff, is that some variation of it's the best Iron Maiden album that Maiden never recorded. And I don't agree. But I want you to think about this for a second. Clear that preconception out of your mind, because I think it's wrong. So let's just ignore that. Everyone take a deep breath. To me, Accident of Birth is stained class era Judas Priest with Bruce Dickinson on vocals. It has a much more conventional rhythm section than Nico McBrain and Steve Harris. There is no Iron Maiden in the rhythm section on this album. There's only a couple of songs on Accident of Birth that I think would even be decent Iron Maiden songs. And that's The Dark Side of Aquarius and Taking the Queen. I think they could have done those in Maiden and done them justice. But then you have songs like Man of Sorrows, which to me is the worst song on the album, because Bruce wrote it years and years before this album with the intent to use it in a movie soundtrack about this movie he had always wanted to make about Aleister Crowley, or Crowley, I think they say in the UK. By the way, some of the songs from Seventh Son of a Seventh Son were also from Bruce's conception of that same project, like Moonchild. And he did eventually put out the wonderfully wretched movie Man of Sorrow, or no, it's not called Man of Sorrows. Oh, all of a sudden I'm forgetting what the title is. But he put out this movie about Aleister Crowley in 2008. It's terrible, which isn't to say it's not entertaining, but it's terrible. Now, I think that Accident of Birth is a very modern sounding album. It's got very down-tuned guitars. It's very aggressive. It's certainly more aggressive than anything that Maiden had put out to date in the 90s. So in that way, it's very modern. Then you have that throwback song, Man of Sorrows, which is, it's not even metal, that's just rock. And a soundtrack song at that. And the two compositions with Adrian Smith, which don't fit sonically in with the rest of the album at all. The Road to Hell is a good song, but it's very pedestrian. It's not as, in my mind, it's not as creative as the other tracks on the album. But then you get to Welcome to the Pit, which is very much like Adrian's work with Psycho Motel, sorry. He's tuned to drop D, which apparently Adrian, until he was in the 90s, Adrian didn't know what drop D was. But once he discovered it, he really liked it and liked how it enabled these heavy riffs. And you produce this really strange, creepy song, except it doesn't fit in with the other songs on the album. You can hear when that song starts, everything changes. The whole EQ profile of it changes. But then you have these very kind of stereotypical Judas Priest songs like Freak, Star Children, or The Magician. I can imagine Rob Halford singing The Magician, right? So these are all great songs. They're upbeat, they're fast, they're aggressive, but they're conventional. There's no gallop to them. There's not really much, well, there's no Nico and Steve, and that's really what keeps it from being an Iron Maiden comparison to me. Now, that said, I think the entire album is a masterpiece. I especially love the last two tracks, Omega and The Ark of Space. The Ark of Space is this apparently inspired by a true story of people who every year they go up on this mountain waiting for aliens to come down and take them off to their next life. And the aliens never show up, right? So that's at the end of the song, he's like, well, perhaps again next year. And it's really interesting because when Bruce talks about the song in interviews, he's pretty dismissive of that worldview. But I think the lyric is actually quite neutral in that regard, right? In addition to just having guitars, they've got a lot of orchestration. There's strings and there's keyboards. And this is something else that really separates it from Iron Maiden, especially when we get to Brave New World. I think that also there's only one really like Maiden length epic track on Accident of Birth. Most of the songs are shorter, 5 minutes thereabouts. And the longer track benefits from that extra instrumentation. The use of the keyboards and strings makes it more interesting, which is a lesson that could be applied to Maiden, and yet they don't for what I think are some specific reasons. Now, I'm going to suggest before we hit Brave New World, I'm just going to say I give this a 9 out of 10. It'd be a 10 out of 10 if it wasn't for Man of Sorrow. I just think that that particular song is completely out of place on this. And the movie that it eventually ended up on is truly terrible. I would like to hear Peter's take on Accident of Birth before we hit Brave New World, if that's all right.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, let's go over to Peter.
Well, good evening, Reed. Well done, sir. So I got Accident of Birth before Brave New World. So I got this in real time. And it's hard to miss the cover when you're searching through the way we looked for records back in the day. You just go through every file you could and see if there was something new in there. But so the comparisons, as he said, are not really apples to apples. They're, it's maybe, an apple to, well, whatever we want to use. They are very different records. They serve very different purposes, and they accomplish two very different things. Accident of Birth, to me, is, and I will just say it, is also a masterpiece. I have it about a 9.5 out of 10. I will disagree with Reed. I think Man of Sorrows, while it doesn't fit compositionally, it fits in a larger theme of why I love this album so much. And that theme is all about Bruce, his singing, and Adrian's guitar playing, as well as the sonics of this. I think it sounds amazing. Bruce has never sounded better on any pre-Maiden or post-Maiden record than he does singing on Accident of Birth and Chemical Wedding. He's a little more tired on Tyranny of Souls. Obviously touring more with Maiden, getting older, those kinds of things start to take their toll. But on this record specifically, I think it is one of, if not the pinnacle of Bruce's vocal capabilities. He is limitless in his range, in his clarity, in his delivery of both pitch and diction. He's extremely easy to understand, always was, but it's exceptional here. And I think that compositionally, this is a home run. All of these songs are so concise and sculpted down to no filler, no extra this. I don't need a long intro. Some of the songs are just boom, you're right in. Other ones may have a slightly more melodic or a melodramatic entry, and then it proceeds into the song. But none of them are lengthy and languish. None of them make you go, oh, can we get to where we're going here? It's not present on these songs. And they have such a variety of styles. Some real just straightforward rock and roll stuff. Some a little more progressive. Some, dare I say, I hate to use the word as a title because I can't stand it, grungy. It's contemporary, it's younger, and it's one of the reasons why Bruce ended up cutting his hair off, because he looked at videos of them playing live and he looked like somebody's, old hippie grandfather with all the young kids up there with their shorter hair, and he got rid of it. And I look at this and I look at the solos that Adrian did on here, some of his best work, very melodic, instantly recognizable as Adrian. And they're really enjoyable from that standpoint. I don't have a single track on here that I dislike. I can listen to it from top to bottom without any issue. It's always been on heavy rotation for me. And, I love the album cover, and it both, another comparison, both, when we get to this, the top half is Derek Riggs, the bottom is a CGI composite, but both albums have Derek Riggs, both albums have Bruce, both albums have Adrian. And to me, that's kind of where the comparisons stop, because one went this way and one took a circuitous turn the opposite way, but has to be linked because of those elements that I just stated. If anybody has not heard Accident of Birth and is even a remote fan of anything Maiden's done or Bruce as a singer, this is a must-own. You've got to have it in your library, and you need to check it out as soon as you can get your hands on it, or go to YouTube. So that's where I'll stay, and we'll let the comparisons fall as they do when we get to the second part of it. But I love this record, and always have.
Don't go to YouTube.
Awesome.
Get a good audio source, doggone it.
Well, I said buy it first.
You did.
So you did. So I do want to, and I completely agree. This is Bruce's best vocal performance. I mean, I really love Accident, or not Accident, but I love Chemical Wedding. He has some performances, especially on the song Chemical Wedding. He's just so grand and operatic.
That's my 10 out of 10.
Yes. Which I'm kind of curious why you didn't choose Chemical Wedding for the comparison instead of Accident of Birth. Let's hit that real quick.
Proximity. This was Bruce's kind of return to harder rock metal. His return for, I looked at it as kind of a first versus a first, even though both of them came out, before Brave New World. Right. I do the same thing with Halford. I do Resurrection versus Angel of Retribution.
Sure.
So to me, it seemed like once he got back into the same, at least ballpark genre wise, that's where the comparisons were to start. And then that even makes the Chemical Wedding conversation even more interesting, because I enjoy that album even more than this one.
Interesting. Well, we're right about in the same area there. I will say, pardon me, in terms of Bruce's vocal performance on Accident of Birth, you get everything that is both good and bad about Bruce. And there are some things that people don't like about Bruce's style, that, the human air raid siren, this vocal vibrato he has.
Right.
Bruce, it's hilarious. Both of these albums, I've listened to these albums hundreds of times in the past 22 years. And yet it occurred to me that I had never sat down with a good set of headphones and just listened to the CD, concentrating on the music. I'm almost always doing something else while I listen to music, right? I think most of us are.
I do exactly the opposite. I shut everything else off when I listen.
See, you get a different experience. But really digging into these albums and just absorbing it, I realized, like, Bruce does not hold notes. It's the weirdest thing. Bruce glisses up to notes. He glisses down from notes. He goes up and down in pitch. He hits his targets and then he backs off pretty quickly. And I don't know if that's a technique he developed to save his voice on those high notes or what, but Bruce is not somebody who just holds this really high note. But he does on Chemical Wedding, which makes it a very different vocal performance.
Yes, I agree completely. Especially live on Scream for Me Brazil. He's just destroying it.
Yes. Yeah, everybody get Bruce's whole discography, people. It's fantastic. Now, let's talk Brave New World for a bit. And let's, understand that my impression of Brave New World can only be what it is. I experienced it in 2000. I was a man who loved Iron Maiden and yet was disappointed with No Prayer for the Dying and actively disliked Fear of the Dark. I like a couple of songs on Fear of the Dark. I like the song Fear of the Dark, but in general, I think that album is kind of lifeless. There's some interesting ideas, but they're not delivered particularly well. And sadly, that would then carry on to X Factor and Virtual 11.
Right.
So I was off the Iron Maiden bandwagon, and Brave New World is the album that got me back as a fan. So you can only view this album as an album that was put out with a mission. Now, in this manner, I do think it's the same as this album. This was Bruce proving to people that he could still do metal. This was Iron Maiden proving that they could still sell to the masses, that they could still hit a home run. And I can only imagine what the politics in the band on this were. Famously, Bruce said he would not come back if Steve was still producing. They had to get an outside producer. So they got Kevin Shirley. You know, I'm neither high nor low on Kevin Shirley. I think he's done some good sounding things. I think he's done some things that don't sound so good. I do think that maybe it would have been more interesting for the remainder of their career if they'd worked with some different producers from time to time, but you know, so be it. You've got Adrian Smith coming, but Yannick Gers doesn't leave. So now they've got 3 guitarists. And I know Yannick Gers gets a ton of hate on the internet, which I've never understood. I've seen Maiden in concert a bunch of times in the 21st century. And you know what? Adrian and Dave are the most boring people on the planet. They just stand it. I mean, I've seen concerts where Adrian Smith looks like he's freaking bored and he'd rather be back at the hotel. Still plays well, but he doesn't look like he's enjoying himself. Whereas Yannick's over there, you know, dancing around and having fun. You know, he on Brave New World, he plays more solos than either Dave or Adrian. It's a very heavy Yannick Gers album. Now, maybe for some people that's a problem. It is not for me. But so you've got all of these politics, and I think all you have to do is look at the track listing. Steve Harris's name is on every song. Bruce has a couple of writing credits. Adrian has a couple of writing credits. Dave Murray has a couple of writing credits. Yannick has a few writing credits. As far as I know, Nico still only has a single writing credit.
One,
yeah, just the one. But Steve's name is on every freaking song. So you can tell he's like, all right, this far, but no farther. You know, we're, and here's where I think is a huge comparison. Accident of Birth is a big leap forward in heavy metal for Bruce. Brave New World is Iron Maiden holding the line, because by now it's 2000. And I've read reviews of the thing that are unfavorably comparing them to nu metal, like bands like Korn. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of not the point of this album. This album's a flag in the sand. It's owning that space and saying, we're not a nostalgia band. We're not a greatest hits band. We're not going to just go out and play songs up to Power Slave. This is what we are now, and we're going to move it forward. And yes, there were songs that they brought in that Steve Harris and Yannick Gers and Dave Murray had written before the album. I think Dream of Mirrors and Nomad and one other, Mercenary, maybe. Anyway, there were songs already written before they started recording this album. But there are a couple of big differences between this album and Fear of the Dark, which was the last one that Bruce was on. Adrian was already gone by the time they did Fear of the Dark. The first is they recorded all of these songs live. Not the vocals. I mean, maybe he was singing vocals while they were playing. I don't know. But the vocals are double and triple tracked. There's harmony vocals. There's more treatment of Bruce's voice on this Maiden album than any other album I can remember, at least prior to that, right?
Right.
They do all kinds of stuff with Bruce's voice. That is very different. And I have to presume that that's Kevin Shirley bringing that in, because I think if Maiden were going to do that before, they would have. But
he double tracked a lot of stuff when he was with Geddy on Rush as well. Yeah, it's kind of a Shirley thing at the moment. It was kind of his thing at the time.
See, I have to take your word for that. But the other is the playing live. Now, I'm going to get back to the listening experience. So I've got my good these are not my good headphones. These are my chat headphones. But I've got my good headphones on. I'm just sitting in a room concentrating on this music. And I heard things on here that I have never heard before. And there are 2 ways to look at that in terms of the production. One is that the production kind of lets you down, because unless you're really paying attention, you actually miss out on about 25% of the sonics of this album. They are way in the background. And now that we've got a 3-guitar band, that starts to be an issue. Oh, and I'm sorry if I sneeze. I've allergies have kicked in here this evening, and I have no way to mute it really quickly. I'm sorry. I'm going to try not to. You can tell the songs that were composed after Bruce and Adrian returned to the band because they handle the 3 guitar parts better. Not all of the songs on here are equally arranged, I guess is the correct term. I'm not a musician. I know I've got guitars. I like playing guitar. I'm not a musician. And because it's performed live, you can actually hear, if you've got a good audio source and you're paying attention, like when they're holding bends, you can hear where the bends are starting to decay as the guy's fingers are getting tired, right? Or they hold a note just a little too long, where if they were recording individually, just digitally, the producer would certainly just chop that off. Instead, what you get is a very live, organic performance. And you can tell none of these guys are phoning it in. They're all really going for it. And Bruce is going for it. He doesn't sound tired. He doesn't sound angry. He's gotten what he wants. He's got an outside producer. He's getting to write some songs and do different material. And even on the songs that Steve had already brought in, I think he's doing a bang up job on the vocals. Now, he doesn't have the variety of styles that he employs on Accident of Birth. Uses a little more vocal fry, and Kevin Shirley has a very different just based sound than Roy Z does as a producer. So you get a much different output, but I think he really sells it. And especially when you get to the last two songs. Actually, I love how this album bookends. The first two songs I think are killer, and the last two songs I think are killer. It's the songs in between that we can kind of talk about. But Bruce's vocal performance on The Thin Line Between Love and Hate or Out of the Silent Planet is amazing. Out of the Silent Planet could have been on, oh man, Somewhere in Time. Sorry, old man brain there for a second. It would have fit right in with that kind of thing. And, you know, The Wicker Man is a one-song mission statement. That is everything about a shorter Iron Maiden track rolled into a single track. Now, if you're cynical, you can say, come on, they're trying to sound like Iron Maiden. And I'm like, no, they weren't trying to sound like Iron Maiden. They were sounding like Iron Maiden, and it's great. Now, that said, you get into those middle tracks. I actually love the first three tracks because I also love Brave New World. But Blood Brothers, I think, is quite good, although it's lengthy. The Mercenary is not one I'm super fond of. Dream of Mirrors was a song that they brought in, and I think it's quite good, especially because it has a little more variation. It opens with the acoustic bass and guitar. Fallen Angel, which is another Adrian number, and you can still hear the Psycho Motel influence in that. Adrian is still bringing his 90s influences into Maiden. It's okay. I'm sure some people love it because it's, you know, one of the more aggressive songs on it. And then you get to Nomad, and I like some of it because it's so weird and different, but I don't think it's one of the stronger tracks on the album. And you really start to notice that one of the differences between what Bruce was doing with his solo band and what Maiden is doing is Bruce brought in that extra instrumentation. He's got strings, he's got keyboards. They're doing extra parts that make the songs more interesting. But Maiden, for better or worse, are holding the line on It's Just Us. Although they do have some instrumentation on a couple of the songs. I mean, orchestration, but it's very minor. For the most part, no matter how long the song is, it's just three guitars, bass drums, vocals. And I think they would actually benefit from bringing in keyboards, you know, having one of the guitarists play guitar synth or something, because they are not always wonderful at coming up with three completely different guitar parts at the same time. It's one thing to have three soloists. Any group of three guitarists can solo and sound completely different. I mean, that's great. But we're really talking about the meat and potatoes of the songs is where they start to, you know, they're trying to find parts which don't step on each other's toes. And they are not always, you know, the Tetris blocks of the songs are not always lined up for me. So I don't think it sounds as good as Accident of Birth, but I think it's a phenomenal album. I think it went down a storm when I saw this concert. By the time they hit the whoa-oh chorus at the end of Wicker Man, everyone was on their feet. So is it a 9? No. but I'm still going to give it an 8, and I love it. I think tonight I might like Accident of Birth a little bit more, but that's not every day.
All right. Well, awesome. I think that was a very in-depth and thoughtful perspective on it. Peter, I'm sure you're going to do the same. So we'll hear your thoughts now.
Yep. Again, very enjoyable read. Thank you. That was awesome. I think Brave New World is subject to not just comparisons for the sake of this discussion to Accident of Birth. It has to be also compared to Maiden itself, because this is an ongoing band. This is an existing band. It's a return, to quote a classic era, with the return of Bruce and Adrian. Similar to Reed, I got on again with the first album. I found the first cover in the miscellaneous bin back in the day and have pretty much had every album in real time since. I was also not a big fan of No Prayer for the Dying, and Fear of the Dark is a horrible hard listen for me, and I have no interest in revisiting X Factor or Virtual 11. But we have to talk about them for my purposes, because a lot of Brave New World suffers from what I call the Fear of the Dark effect. And I'm talking about the Fear of the Dark song, not the album. It is this compositional style of starting quiet, moving into this louder thing that's got the sing-along already built into it. It's got the harmony or the double guitar part or the Celtic flair, whatever it is you want to call it, the sing-along. You get to a chorus, changes tempos completely. They do that for a while. They go back to the verse, back to the original feel and style. Well, we got to change it now. It's the guitar solo. Let's change it to another feel. Going back to the chorus, back to its original. And a lot of the songs on Brave New World also suffer from what I call the endless monotony of repeated chorus. Fear of the dark, fear of the dark, fear of the dark, fear of the, in a brave new world, in a brave new world, in a brave new world. You know, we're blood brothers, we're blood brothers, we're blood brothers. Let's do it again. Let's say it again. You know, nomad, nomad, nomad. They just repeat ad nauseum for me compositionally. And they are not, from a composition standpoint, nearly as concise, sharp, and precision driven as Accident of Birth. But they're not supposed to be, because that's not who Maiden was. And as we've seen from subsequent releases long after Brave New World, that's not who Maiden became. The interesting thing about this is that, yes, returning with Bruce and Adrian was a big shot in the arm, especially live. I saw this tour, and ironically, that tour had Rob Halford open with Queensryche in the middle. And I'm going to tie this in because this will be apples to apples. Halford now, with said Roy Z, has released Resurrected, his return to metal. And he didn't just hit it, he knocked it out of the park, and maybe out of the other park that was adjacent to it. It's exceptional, crushing, brilliant, heavy metal. It is I put it in mostly in my top 6 or 7 Judas Priest performances. Probably in the top 5. It's that good in my opinion. So I look at what happens in 2000. Roy Z has got Rob just absolutely crushing it. Tight compositions, focused, brilliant dual guitar playing, heavy, fast, proficient rhythm sections. Maiden is, for a lack of a better word, still kind of languishing a bit. There's a little bit of ankle weight that seems to, Bruce may want to kind of run a bit. Maybe Adrian wants to run a bit. Hold on. I know we got a new producer, but it's Steve's band. And it will always be Steve Harris's band. I don't care who the producer is. I don't. Steve gives the okay or the no. And that's where it'll start and that's where it'll stop. When I first heard the opening track, just like Reed, Wicker Man to me is a return. Well, it's not a comparison A to A, but it's got a feel of a Rothschild or something else. It is concise. It's a riff driven with a good chorus and a great solo by Adrian. It's tight, but it's modern. It's never going to sound like stuff from Killers. That's fine. But in its concept, it's right there. And then it turns. You get through this middle section, and for me, this is a writing style that whoever's names are on the credits are on there, but Maiden has swam in these waters for the rest of their career. All the compositions have these, here's the quiet bass intro with Nico on the hi-hat, here's the extra parts, Bruce comes in, they change the tempo in the chorus. I mean, it's got the sing-along, blah, blah, blah. In Final Frontier, in Book of Souls, in you can just go on and on. Final Frontier, and the other one I'm missing, the one with the battle scene on the front. Why can't I remember that?
A Matter of Life and Death.
Matter of Life and Death. And for me, it just really went off the rails in Senjutsu. And to me, the album lacks an overall feel that, and I'm a huge fan of Steve. I mean, Steve and Nico. I love those guys. Because obviously they did it. Peace of Mind and Power Slave and Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son are spectacular records. Absolutely spectacular. So they're capable. It's not like they just didn't know how to be musicians anymore. But a musician is only as good as the composition he has to perform. And to me, the composition, which started to deteriorate on No Prayer, continued on. It has gotten back to Brave New World and continues on. And I listened to it semi-regularly as when it first came out, but it didn't take long for its luster to wear off. I just can't get past the compositions, the endless repetition of the choruses. I just like my songs a little more cohesive, a little more, I don't know if I want to use traditional because that's a huge range and that can mean anything. They just don't work for me. I also am not a fan of Kevin's production on this. I think the album's muddy. I think in some songs it's more murky than others. And we have to talk about how the addition of a third instrument changes the sonic palette of a band. Listen to anything live pre-Brave New World. I don't care who's in the band, what era. The loudest thing you're going to hear is Steve. It's absolutely unmistakable. I can do blind tests forever. You put live stuff on, I'll tell you if it's pre-Brave New World or post. It's that obvious. Because what happens is that Yannick has his sound. And as much as possible, every musician wants to claim and reproduce their sound. Sound is what makes them, along with what they play. So we can think of this as a flow, as a line of all the frequencies between what we can and can't hear at the lowest and the highest spot. You take every sonic palette and think of it as a handprint of every instrument, and you just start overlaying it over that line. And the more they overlap, the more they're going to cancel themselves out sonically, where you lose clarity, you lose focus, and it actually loses energy. Well, you've got 3 guitars now instead of 2. Dave was here, Adrian was here, Steve was everything in the middle. Now there's those and Yannick, and now Steve's bass is fighting along in the middle there somewhere. Not that you can't hear him, it's still Steve, but they sound extremely different. And while that takes a little bit to get used to, if it's got a muddy production with that kind of instrumentation, you've got a recipe for an album that's not going to sound that great, in my opinion. It's a difficult thing to do. How Leonard Skinner did it, I have no idea. The geniuses down at Muscle Shoals, hats off, because you nailed it. And that's a perfect example of a band with multiple, 3 guitarists that they found a way for every one of those to fit in the sonic palette that you can hear them. So don't want to get too far in the weeds on that, but it does have an impact on how the album's delivered, how it's heard, and it's different for everybody, obviously. But for me, it made it difficult to get through it sonically, because as Reed said, even as a very critical listener, and I probably put myself in the 1%, like how I listen to stuff, it's not normal. Most people don't set aside time like that to listen, but that's how I enjoy it. And even then, you can miss things because it's not transparent enough. It's not, the optic in it is a little bit murky. So there's a whole lot of things, as far as comparisons, as far as my listening, I like the album cover better. I like the production better. I like the guitar solos better. I like the compositions better. Bruce's voice is better. And everything on Accident to Birth is superior for me. And this, I also think that Brave New World is, for my choice, is the apex of the return of Bruce. And it's just been a slow decline since Brave New World. I definitely prefer Brave New World over anything that came after it. And then going back to Reed's point, here's where it gets very interesting. Because then when Bruce does come out with his 3rd heavy solo record, Tyranny of Souls, now you can compare, because he's been in Maiden, he's been in there, and that is immensely more enjoyable and a much better listen and way more authentic. Bruce still sounds amazing. The compositions are great, even though Adrian is not on that one. It's that trio of Accident, Chemical Wedding, and Tyranny of Souls those are my go-to Bruce things post Seventh Son. So
I would, one of these days, you and I need to do a chat about Chemical Wedding and Tyranny of Souls. So give it a quick ranking out of 10, and then I have a couple of rebuttal points, not really rebuttal, things to think about that we can discuss a little bit before we.
It's never going to top any of the albums up through Seventh Son. So there's no comparison there. And I think there's a big drop off. Like I said, I do like it better than the 4 that were wallowing around in between that period of time. So I think maybe I could muster a 5. It maybe on a good day, if I'm just kind of enjoying and not being too much of an anal musician and looking at it compositionally or anything like that, but and just listening to it as musician, as songs and things, probably a 5. But most days brutal. It's probably less than that. So
okay. So I did have a thought while I was listening to Brave New World this last time.
Okay.
And that is, work with me on this, there is a chance that you and I are no longer the target audience for this album. So by the time Fear of the Dark comes out, Iron Maiden's biggest audiences worldwide are Eastern Europe and South America.
South America, right.
two places that, one, are just starved for heavy metal, period, and two, don't speak English. And after that, you start to notice exactly what you're talking about in the composition. I think of that as Steve arranging his songs for live performance.
Bingo.
For people who don't speak English.
Bingo.
But they can, if you're just repeating, we're blood brothers, we're blood brothers, we're blood brothers. If you watch any of the DVDs they've recorded in Brazil or Mexico City,
they're
everybody
singing their
sings
brains
along
out.
with those choruses.
Yes, they're singing their brains out.
And they love it. So he's throwing a bone to his South American and Mexican fans. I'm throwing Eastern Europe in with that. I presume they're the same. I've never seen a concert recorded in Eastern Europe, but I bet it's very similar. And I think that you and I are no longer really that intended audience.
No, and it's very interesting because my experience with that tour was maybe a little bit different than what you experienced. The crowd at the UIC Pavilion in Chicago, which is a step down for Maiden. They used to play either the United Center or mostly the Rosemont Horizon, which are the two much bigger auditoriums, stadiums. So here they are in a smaller, on a triple bill with Rob Halford, who for a lot of fans had kind of just written off. They're not listening to two. Maybe they listened to Fight for a little bit, but that was a long time ago. And Queensryche had kind of fallen off the map by this point. Their compositions had deteriorated and they were a mess. So this wasn't the Empire, Operation Mindcrime era band. So I believe, and if I recall correctly, they opened the show with the first 4 tracks from Brave New World. All the people around me were completely sitting down going, I have no idea what the hell they're playing. Didn't have a clue until they kicked into an old classic, and all of a sudden they went crazy. They'd finished the classic ones, dig back in, and because here is the thing about Maiden, and Bruce is very much a part of this, and they are adamant that we are a current band, we have current material, and we're going to play it. And I'm going to call you out, which he has done on many occasions. If you're being kind of lackluster and sitting on your ass and you're pissing me off because you look bored. That's the way they think. And you can see a huge jump in ticket sales in the US as they alternate their tour styles. They come out with a tour that is a retro tour. Oh, Legacy of the Beast. Oh, they come out and redo Seventh Son, the Maiden England tour. Packed. They play the big outdoor stadium. They're all on the grass all the way back to the back wall. It's mobbed because everybody knows every single song they're playing. They go back to a new album, new tour, back and forth, how much they play, how much they don't play. So there is a huge thing with Maiden on that. And so they were playing a lot of this record on the tour, and it connected in some ways, but in a lot of ways it didn't. And I agree that, someone who's been with the band, since 80 may not be that target anymore. We moved on to other stuff. And yes, it's cool that Bruce is back and we're going to check it out. But maybe it doesn't sustain and doesn't go longer term, at least not in the US.
There you go. I rest.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I think that was we normally have more people on the panels, but since we only had 2 tonight, I'm glad it was you two, because you both did a great job of not only keeping us entertained with your thoughts, but you guys went for a long time, and none of it was filler, I would say. So that was great. Thank you so much. There you have it. It's a unanimous decision here tonight. Now, if you like what you're seeing, if you want to join the discussion in the comments below, if you want to give a subscribe, we'd appreciate all those things. And like I said at the top of the episode, there are other ways to support channel in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you all for being here and for taking the time to have this conversation with us. So please, put your comments in the comment section below. I want to thank Reed and Peter for coming here tonight and for giving their thoughts. Again, this was really entertaining. I feel a little personally attacked by some of the things that are said because I love a matter of life and death, but that's okay.
Oh, good.
That's okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Nothing wrong with that.
I said,
I
I often
also
say
like Fear the Dark. So.
I'm not the taste police. Love anything you want. Everyone's got
No.
different ears.
No, but you may have ruined Brave New World for me, Peter, with the chorus thing, because that never clicked until you said that. Now
That's completely true. Yeah, you're either on board with that or you can't get through the album.
You can't get through it.
Well, this was a lot of fun. So thanks guys. Thanks everyone at home. Up the irons and have a great night, everyone, or day or morning, whatever it is. Have a good one.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.